It's a story as old as time. A hero is called to action. They gather a team, go on a death-defying quest, vanquish their enemy, and return to admiration from all. And then, the story ends. We close the book, turn off our TV, or power off our game console. But what if the story didn't end after the hero finished their journey? Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, seeks to answer such a question. Structuralism and post-structuralism are some of the most contentious terms in academia. Academics in different fields propose and invoke different definitions for the terms all the time. For the sake of this video essay, let's simply think of narrative structuralism as the structure of stories. Moreover, let's think of narrative post-structuralism as critiques of the structures of stories. So, if the narrative structure is the three-act structure, the narrative post-structure would be the critique of the three-act structure. In this example, the structuralist theory suggests that stories have beginnings, middles, and ends, whereas the post-structuralist theory suggests that taxonomizing stories is inherently subjective, and therefore not evidence of structure. It's a gross simplification, but structuralists generally seek to make sense of the world through a systematic methodology of interrelation. Meanwhile, post-structuralists generally seek to critique structuralism, primarily due to its ontological subjectivity, the hegemony it's been systemized within, and the inherent bias of its authors. But there are many, many more criticisms. Of course, there's much more to the structuralism versus post-structuralism debate, but let's leave that be for another time. For this video essay, we're using post-structuralism as a theoretical framework to critique the hero's journey, which is a popular narrative structure. We can trace narrative structuralism as a methodology of writing and criticism all the way back to ancient Greece. Aristotle's Poetics was one of the first texts to examine narratology, aka the study of stories and how they're told. In the 20th century, Carl Jung theorized that a collective unconscious connects the people of the world, and that certain stories and characteristics of stories exist in predefined structures that transcend time and culture. This is evidenced in stock characters, such as the wise old man, and archetypes, such as the self, the shadow, the anima/animus, and the persona. Jung's structuralist theory of the collective unconscious built upon Aristotle's Poetics. In turn, Joseph Campbell built upon Jung's structuralist theory with one of his own, the monomyth, aka the hero's journey. Campbell outlines the hero's journey's constituent acts in his 1949 book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. If you're unfamiliar with Frieren, then allow me to explain. Frieren is a Japanese manga that was adapted as an anime series between 2023 and 2024. The eponymous character Frieren is an elf mage who's lived for thousands of years. At some point, she is recruited to go on an adventure to defeat the Demon King with Himmel the hero, Eisen the warrior, and Heiter the priest. After completing her journey, she travels the world in search of magic, but returns after 50 years in time to bury Himmel. The main plot of the show picks up decades later as Frieren, alongside her pupil mage Fern and fledgling warrior Stark, travel to see Himmel's soul in a place called Heaven. In Frieren, Himmel is very much the hero of the monomyth. He defeats the all-powerful Demon King and ushers in an era of peace. Himmel is built up to be a perfect ideal of heroism, powerful, empathetic, and kind. Yet, his diegetic characterization is largely mythic, so as to say that it does not literally reflect the character he was, nor the deeds he did. Frieren is not a story of the hero's journey. It is a story about living in the shadow of the hero's journey. Himmel dies in the first episode, and much of what we learn about him comes from others' testimonies. Because of this, he exists mostly as a mythic reconstruction, much in the vein of the great heroes of yore. The show plays with the mythic construction of the hero in a few different ways. For example, there's a flashback in which Himmel is unable to pull out the hero's sword from the ground, suggesting that he cannot live up to the impossible ideal of the hero archetype. There are several other flashbacks in which he stalls the party's progress to feed his own vainglorious ego. Yet, he conquered the Demon King, and won the admiration of the people. They honor his legacy with statues, feasts, and stories. Hell, they even record history as years before and after the death of Himmel the hero. In the process, the people mythologize Himmel. He ceases to be a person at all, and instead becomes the myth of hero. Through flashbacks, we see Frieren grow close with Himmel, yet she always keeps him at arm's distance away. It isn't until after Himmel's death that she starts to develop deeper feelings, and I think this is a very interesting thing. In tracing the hero's journey, Frieren seems to fall in love with Himmel, yet it is not his actual self, but rather a combination of her fading memories and his mythic reconstruction. As such, Frieren seems to fall for the idea of Himmel, a virtuality invented by her own mind. This reflects our own infatuation with the hero as a character archetype. We're often more interested in the sensational abstract than the actual, even if it isn't true. Frieren critiques the narrative structure of the hero's journey by placing us in its shadow, yet it paradoxically seems to reinforce it in other ways. For example, characters like Fern and Stark seem to assume the mantle of new heroes, ironically repositioning the narrative in the same structure it seeks to deconstruct. But it's not without intention. Frieren, the near-eternal elf, reminds us that there is an impermanence to even myth, and that one day Himmel's legacy as hero will be forgotten. A new hero is always needed to remind the people of a real-world ideal to strive towards. And so, we see that we cannot escape narrative structuralism, even in its purposeful deconstruction. I don't mean to be critical of Frieren as a show. I think it does some truly interesting things with its story. But we've established that it is walking in the shadow of the hero's journey. Frieren is literally retracing her steps from the original journey over the course of the first season. And so, Campbell writes, "Where there is a way or path, it is someone else's path. You are not on your own path. If you follow someone else's way, you are not going to realize your potential."